Yeah, I think that so there's this quote from Hudson: to borrow from foreign central banks rather than from its own citizens is one of the economic miracles of modern times, right? Like
Mm.
that's
Hmm.
it. That's in a nutshell the hack that we've been
Yeah.
describing. But like miracle is totally in the eye of the beholder, right? Was it a miracle for the Vietnamese or the Iraqis or Afghans? Like
Right.
definitely not, right? So you get to this point of like of peace theory, which I hope we can just sit on for a second. Like, you
Mm.
know, Immanuel Kant in 1795, he had this essay called Toward Perpetual Peace. And his work is largely credited for the kind of underpinnings of this theory or framework called democratic peace theory, which
Hmm.
sort of states that no two fully democratic nations will fight each other, which has largely been borne out like in history. Like there are some exceptions and stuff, but like generally speaking, like, you know, two countries that have like, you know, which have elections and property rights and free speech and stuff like that, they usually don't fight each other.
Right.
And what's interesting is he says that in this essay, which was written 120 years before the gold standard started to break
Hmm.
down, right? He started talking about how like a credit system used by a global power would show the power of money in its most dangerous form. And he says essentially that um, these because these debts could go on growing indefinitely, this kind of system would basically potentially create a military fund which would grow larger than the resources of all the other states put together.
Hmm.
And this is something again he's predicting in 1795. And you know, he says the only limit will be the tax deficit, right, that you'll have. Um, but that can be pushed off but through the credit system itself. And he talks about how this ease in making war that would be made possible through like a global credit money system is thus a great obstacle in the way of perpetual peace. So, you know, in his article or his essay that like has obviously inspired a huge amount of thinking over the last several hundred years, and maybe an often overlooked part of it was that he was basically saying like we can't have the world's global monetary power run a credit money system. Like otherwise we're
Yeah.
going to get a lot of war. This is basically what he's saying here. And so then we start to think about like some of the critics of this or the criticisms of this idea, right? So okay, well, would a true gold standard have like deterred the Vietnam War? um well, I don't know, but it certainly would have shortened it, that's for sure. Definitely not have been that long. Would a true gold standard would have shortened the First World War? Definitely. There's no way they could have paid for all those guns and troops had they not gone off the gold standard. So, you know, and then you get into the idea of like, well, fine, but what about like all the wars that happened during the gold standard, right? Okay. Um, so here's where we get to like the idea of again, maybe gold failed or was defeated, right? Or wasn't good enough, right?
Hmm.
But what if there's like a Bitcoin peace theory, right? Kind of like democratic peace theory.
Hmm.
And what if it builds its power based on the fact that Bitcoin is such an improvement over gold in many different areas, including the fact that it's like really hard to demonetize, right? I mean, if you think about Satoshi, right? Satoshi chose April 15th as their birthday, right?
Hmm.
April 15th was the day that the FDR administration passed Executive Order 6102, you know, beginning the sort of seizure of gold of citizens in the United States, right? So, you know, clearly Satoshi was designing Bitcoin to be resistant to a 6102 attack, right?
Yeah.
Maybe one, and they obviously spent a lot of time looking at how gold had failed. Like
Hmm.
there were some things, and if you look at Satoshi's writings, they're thinking about that. Like they know gold's important. Like if you look at the writings there, you know that they were thinking about how there had to be a decentralized mint. Humans couldn't be in charge of monetary policy.
Hmm.
Like big appreciation for gold, but also knowledge about 6102, knowledge about how gold failed.
Hmm.
So, you know, can Bitcoin actually put forward a peace theory, a framework whereby it would prevent war? And I think that we can see that gold was clearly a restraint, but that it could be like the shackles could be thrown off, right? So what if Bitcoin, once it fully monetizes, can't be the shackles can't be thrown off? And I guess my point is that if it remains possible to relatively easily self-custody, and if most of the Bitcoin is held by people and not by governments, and confiscation becomes really hard, and people practice self-custody, we can will this into existence. Like we can have a society or a global society where war is prohibitive and where it, happens much less. I mean, I don't think it's going to end all war, but like where things like the needless carnage of World War One and the absurd extravagance of bombing Cambodia and Vietnam for so many years for arguably something that didn't work at all. Like, guess what happened when we left Vietnam, right? Or even just Afghanistan. Like, even if you're going to take the most charitable viewpoint and say, look what we did for the women of Afghanistan. Okay, I agree. But guess what? Who's in charge now? And, it's like we're the hubris, right? Like the limits of what we can do. I think Bitcoin would just kind of be guardrails against that. Like some of these forever war things just aren't possible. Like, again, the fact that like this fiat system has disenfranchised citizens from making decisions about war in America, which is supposed to be a democracy. The average American might vote, but they have no idea how many wars we're in. I mean, it's not even, you and I can debate this. Are we in 6 wars or 7 wars? Right. Well, I don't know. Does Somalia count or not? Like it's like, and I'm like a relative expert in this area and I don't even know. Like, so it's like, we're fighting so many wars that we don't even know how many that we're fighting. Like that's how disenfranchised we've been. That was not going to be the case under the gold standard when governments had to like tax to get the money to go fight. And like during all these long wars, yes, it's true, they fought. But when they ran out of money, and they had to go get more gold, right? It was like they had to stop the war to go get more gold, right? So not the case in the past century. And what's fascinating is that war does seem to be the engine. It does seem to be the thing that drives us into the fiat world. Like if you look at, again, World War One, you look at Vietnam, like the big Korea, like honestly, over all the history we've covered in this conversation, we initially went off the gold standard to fight World War One. America became a debtor nation, lost its creditor status during the Korean War. And we broke off the gold standard as a result of Vietnam. So like war has this really deep relationship with gold. And they're clearly at odds in the lens of at least international monetary, theory.